Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Naomi, and today I want to teach you how to prepare for your very first yoga class. Or another way to think of it is how to know what you need when you go to a yoga class for the first time. So this is really great for those of you who are brand new to yoga and maybe you've been doing a lot of yoga online and you want to go to a yoga studio, but you're kind of nervous about what to do and you don't want to ask a lot of questions. You're not really sure what you're going to need or what to expect. This is also really great if you've been practicing yoga online for a while, but you kind of feel like you're missing something. Maybe you're missing some props. Maybe you're just missing some of the basic fundamental ideas that are preventing you from really feeling like you know what you're doing on the yoga mat while watching an online yoga video, okay? So this is also just a really great video in general to have a sense of what you need when you're doing yoga, okay? Just really, really basic in terms of props, but also what to expect, okay? So hopefully this will give you a more well-rounded approach or a clearer approach to what you need to know so that you don't feel weird going to a yoga class, okay? So I have a couple of props with me, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you an idea of what it's like when you first walk into a yoga studio, what you might need, what you might not need, and just some of the things that you can do to feel a little bit more normal, okay? So the props that I have, the most basic are my mat, of course, a blanket, a belt, I have 2 blocks, and I actually have an eye pillow as well. Okay, which I don't always use, but I'll get to that in just a sec. So the first and most important thing, I think, is a yoga mat. Now, if you're practicing at home, you don't necessarily need a yoga mat. You can probably do a lot of things without a mat, so long as you don't have a particularly slippery floor. If you have a very slippery floor, then yeah, you might need a yoga mat. If you are practicing on the carpet, you might not need a yoga mat at all. It depends on the carpet. Hotel carpets tend to be a little bit more slippery, so it depends. But the yoga mat, I think, is the most essential thing that you need for a yoga practice because it gives you sort of boundaries for your practice, right? It says, this is the space that you're practicing in, you can go outside of it a little bit, right? Your hands and your feet might go outside of it, but for the most part, this is your practice space. And that's pretty cool, right? It sort of sets the boundaries for that, okay? So that's one really helpful thing that I think everybody, if you're gonna invest in your yoga practice, invest in your mat, okay? Make a good yoga mat investment, okay? Now, another thing that you might need when you walk into a yoga studio is you might need a blanket, okay? Now, I really like using a blanket to sit on. I'm not sitting on one right now, but if I'm gonna sit cross-legged, which is the way that many yoga teachers will invite you to sit, either cross-legged or with your ankles crossed, meaning you have one heel sort of in front of the other heel and your ankles are sort of crossed in front of each other. It feels a little bit nicer to have a blanket underneath your hips because it gives your hips a little bit more of a lift. So, if you're a little bit tighter in your hips, when you sit down on the ground, your knees might lift way up and your low back might round a little bit and your head goes forward. And if you sit like this for a long time, that's not very comfortable. But if you sit up on a blanket, the blanket will help tilt your pelvis a little bit forward, and that's going to help you sit more upright. It's going to help relax your knees. Now, if that still doesn't relax your knees all the way, you can also use blocks, and you could put blocks underneath your thighs just so that you don't have to work so hard, right? So if I'm sitting in this seat, that's from the side, this is forward. If I'm sitting in that seat, in a cross-legged position and my knees are really high up, I can put the blocks underneath them and they can relax down. And it just gives me a little bit more of a seat. Okay, now the reason this is important is that a lot of yoga classes, particularly in yoga studios, start like this, right? They start with some kind of centering. Now, centering might mean that the teacher is sitting and talking to you about what you're going to do in class. So the teacher might be telling you that you're going to be, focusing on standing poses, or you might be doing back bends, or you might be doing twists, or, you might be doing an arm balance or something kind of wild like that, right? The teacher is probably going to give you an idea of that, and the teacher also might, do what is sometimes called a Dharma talk. And a Dharma talk is usually just a way to connect what you're doing on your mat to what's happening in the world, what's happening in your life. Okay, now, this might not happen quite as much in online yoga classes because they tend to be a lot faster paced. And it depends on the teacher, but generally you might not get that quite as much in an online space, but you very likely will if you go to a yoga studio. So the reason that you want to be comfortable at the beginning, the reason you might want a blanket to sit on or blocks under your knees is so that you can sit for a few minutes and just not be sweating, and going, oh my God, when is this going to be over? My body hurts, right? You want to be comfortable from the start. okay? Now, if you're not comfortable in a seated position with your legs crossed, you can extend your legs out to the sides. You can bend your knees if that's more comfortable. You can even grab a chair and sit in a chair. My recommendation is to tell the teacher if sitting on the floor is not comfortable for you, so the teacher knows, right? So that the teacher is prepared that, like sitting on the ground just might not work for you. And that way your teacher can just help make sure that you are more comfortable as well, not only at the beginning, but also throughout. Now, this is something actually that I recommend doing in general. If you have any injuries or any special conditions, if you're pregnant and you're more than, 13 weeks pregnant and, the teacher, so like as a teacher, I never assume that anybody's pregnant and I never ask, right? Because I never want to ask somebody and be like, hey, are you pregnant, and have them not be pregnant at all. That's happened to me. It totally stinks. Right? I don't like assuming based on somebody's body that they're pregnant or not. So if you are pregnant or if you are recently postpartum, those are things that your teacher should know, so that if there are things that you're doing in class that might not be as beneficial for your body, like your teacher should know that so that you can modify, right? So that you can do things a little bit differently to better support your body. So those are some other things that if you're going to go to a studio class, you want to make sure to just give your teacher a heads up about some stuff, okay? Now, the other reason to have blocks is they come in handy with some poses, particularly if you are newer to yoga and maybe tighter in your hips or tighter in your hamstrings or tighter in your shoulders or upper body, okay? Because after this centering, so usually what happens after the centering, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, usually what happens after the centering is you usually sit, often with your eyes closed, and you might take a few breaths and just observe your breath in your body. Okay, so you can do that right now. We'll just take a few moments and close your eyes. And just breathe naturally. You don't have to breathe in a particular way. You don't have to force deeper inhales or exhales. Just observe your breath. Follow your breath as you breathe in. Go all the way into the top of your breath to where you can't breathe in anymore. And then as you exhale, follow your breath out, all the way out until it's all the way emptied. And then breathe in again, all the way in, and all the way out. One last time, follow your breath all the way in. Follow your breath all the way out as it exits your body. And you can open your eyes. But usually that's how a class begins, and then some classes even begin with the sound of Om, right? You can Om if you want. You also don't have to. Like, those are options, right? But those are, like Oming happens sometimes at the beginning of class. If Oming makes you feel weird or uncomfortable, just sit and listen to it, right? Like, sometimes sitting and listening is just as good as actually doing it. So expect that there might be an Om at the beginning of your class. If there isn't, you're not in the wrong place. But just that usually follows the centering with your eyes closed. And part of the reason that teachers center, part of the reason I do, is just to help you create some space from what you walked in with and where you are now, right? So it's to help you turn your attention inward and focus on yourself, right? And part of the reason that teachers Om is to create a sense of collective engagement, right? That you're coming together and sharing a practice, right? So, the Om isn't necessarily deeply spiritual. It's not invoking, some call to a God that you don't believe in or that isn't yours. It's just creating a harmonic sound together so that people can move together as a class, which I think is pretty cool, actually. So that's why Oms happen at the beginning of class, and that's why we center as teachers. At least that's why I do. Now, again, these are things that might or might not happen in an online space or in online classes. The teacher in an online class might not Om because, teacher might be doing it by themselves, right? Which might feel weird to them, or it might feel awesome to them. Like, it really depends on the teacher. Same thing with the centering, okay? So those are things that you can generally expect in a studio class, maybe not in an online class. Now, getting back to blocks, okay? Blocks can be handy in all sorts of poses. So blocks can be handy if you're in a forward bend and you're trying to reach the floor with your legs straight, that your low back rounds and it hurts. So if you grab blocks, you can put your hands on the blocks and bend your knees and just put a little bit more weight into your upper body as well as your legs, right? Particularly if you're feeling it in your low back. Okay, blocks can be great if you're in a lunge. Okay, and your hands, like let's say you're in a lunge and you're stuck over your leg and you feel really, really tight. So blocks can be really great, one under each hand, right, so that you're a little bit more lifted in a lunge. Okay, blocks can also be great if you're in a pose like triangle pose and you can't seem to get your leg straight with your hand on the floor, the block can bring the floor to you. Okay, so blocks can be really fantastic for that. Okay, so it's nice to have blocks handy to help bring the floor to you so that you don't feel like you're struggling in class. Okay, so that's another prop that can be really useful. Now the belt is also useful if you have tighter hamstrings, weaker hamstrings. Sometimes it's used for shoulder work as well. It can be used for all kinds of things, but the belt is really, really great for seated poses. If you can't reach your foot, you can loop the belt over your foot. You can do that seated. It can be really great for poses on your back, right? But this is why you might want to have a belt. So you never really know if you need a belt or not. You know, you can always err on the side of caution, especially if you're newer to yoga and just sort of assume like, I might have to put these props away. That's okay. It's not a big deal, okay? The last thing to think about is what you do at the end of class. And this is also new for a lot of people too. So at the end of most yoga classes is a pose called Shavasana. Now, Shavasana is a pose that translates in Sanskrit as corpse pose. I usually just call it like an adult nap because that's what most of us really need. And you don't necessarily completely fall asleep. Some people do, some people don't. Some people don't like Shavasana at all. But Shavasana is really an opportunity for you to process your practice. Okay, so all that really means is after you've worked really hard, after you've done all of these really fantastic poses, you want to give your body the opportunity to rest. Okay, now, all that really means is you're lying on your back with your eyes closed for a few minutes. Okay, my Shavasanas usually are about 10% of the length of the class. So if you come to a live class with me at a studio and the class is 75 minutes long, Shavasana is going to be about 7.5 minutes. Okay, if it's a 60-minute class, Shavasana is going to be about 6 minutes. If you're in one of my online studio classes, if you take one of the 30-minute classes with me live in my online yoga studio, they're about 3 to 4 minutes. I still do them even in a 30-minute class because rest is important, because your body needs an opportunity to sort of come down and just rebuild, okay? The things that you should know about Shavasana is that Shavasana is not particularly comfortable for everyone, and it's especially not comfortable like on a hard floor if you just put your head back on the floor. So that's another reason that it's nice to have a blanket. So you can fold the blanket up, lie on your back, and have your head supported on a blanket so that if nothing else, your head is supported. Okay? Now, if you have more than one blanket and your low back doesn't feel very good in Shavasana, you can take those 2 blocks that you have. If you only have one blanket, you just put your legs on the blocks and your head is still on this blanket behind you. But if you have 2, you can put your knees on the blanket, or underneath the blocks rather, go underneath your knees. Head is on the floor. You can rest your hands on your belly. And again, this is much more comfortable with my head on a blanket. So, if you don't have a blanket, you can put the blocks under your knees, blanket under your head. And it's delightful. It feels really good for my low back and my head. And I can comfortably be here for a while. Now, this is where the eye pillow comes in. If you're doing a daytime class, sometimes it's too bright to really rest. And you can put an eye pillow over your eyes. Oh, that's amazing. I could stay here for a really long time. I'm nice and grounded and calm and quiet. It's lovely. All right. So that's why you might grab an eye pillow. You don't have to. Not all studios have them. If you're practicing at home, it's nice to have them because it just helps kind of quiet everything and give you the opportunity to just rest peacefully. But know that Shavasana is usually, hopefully your teacher gives you at least a 5-minute Shavasana, maybe a 10-minute Shavasana. If you go to a restorative class, it's all Shavasana all the time. That sounds pretty good sometimes, right? So find a really good restorative class and you're going to be doing like multiple Shavasanas in multiple different orientations of blankets and blocks and, bolsters and, even belts, and it's going to feel amazing and you will want that eye pillow. So make sure that you have the eye pillow too. But know that Shavasana, if it's not comfortable, you can adjust. You can move around. You can roll onto your side. You can even ask your teacher after class, if you go to a studio class, Shavasana didn't feel good. Like, do you have any suggestions? What can I do to make Shavasana feel better? Okay, so just know that you have options in Shavasana, and that Shavasana is really just an opportunity for your body to recharge. So it's a really essential pose. In fact, some people think that it's the most essential pose. But that's something also that usually is a little bit unexpected for people who've never been to a yoga class before. They're like, I'm lying on my back in a room full of strangers with my eyes closed. I don't really understand. So know that that usually happens at the end of class. Sometimes meditation also happens at the end of class, but that's just a way for your body to recharge after all of the awesome poses that you have done. And then when class is over, all you have to do is grab your props, put them back where you found them, and thank your yoga teacher and peace out. So that's about it. Now you know what to expect when you go to a yoga class. At least some of the basics, so that you don't feel like you are completely out of the loop and that you don't feel like you are in the wrong place. So hopefully this has been useful to you. If there are things that you feel like I haven't covered, please let me know in the comments below and I will happily answer your questions. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to getting on the mat with you, online or off, really soon. Until then, bye.